Meet James, the charming delivery driver, Sarah, the meticulous warehouse manager, and Leo, the mastermind behind a multi-million-pound cocaine empire hidden inside blocks of cheese, until one tiny, careless mistake brought their entire operation crashing down. In the quiet suburbs of the United Kingdom, life moved at its usual slow pace. People went about their daily routines, shops opened early in the morning, and deliveries were made with predictable regularity. It was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen, where crime meant the occasional petty theft or vandalism, not something that could shake the entire country. But beneath this seemingly ordinary surface, a criminal operation unlike anything the authorities had seen was quietly taking shape. This operation would come to be known as the Cheese Cocaine Gang, a group that turned one of the most mundane food items into a multi-million-pound smuggling scheme. The idea was almost laughable in its audacity. Cocaine hidden inside blocks of cheese. At first it sounded like something out of a movie or a comic book rather than a real criminal plan. Yet the gang had meticulously designed their operation to exploit exactly that disbelief. They knew that no one would suspect a delivery of cheese in small towns or suburban shops. Cheese trucks were everywhere. They were ordinary, harmless, and completely unremarkable. That ordinary nature became their greatest advantage. For months, the gang operated under the radar, their movements so careful and methodical that authorities were left scratching their heads. The deliveries looked perfectly normal. Cheese trucks moved through quiet streets, stopping at local shops and restaurants. The drivers wore clean uniforms, followed their schedules to the letter, and made sure every transaction appeared legitimate. To the casual observer it seemed like a thriving small business. Behind the scenes, however, each block of cheese was carefully hollowed out and packed with pure cocaine, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. The gang's members were experts in blending in. They were not the stereotypical criminals. They dressed smartly, attended social events, and mingled with ordinary citizens. Their sophistication gave them a layer of protection, making it hard for anyone to even suspect that a criminal empire was operating in plain sight. The police had no leads, and rumors of missing drugs or unusual activity were dismissed as exaggerations or coincidence. In this way, the gang's plan seemed nearly flawless. The logistics were impressive. Every detail was carefully calculated. Routes were planned to avoid surveillance, shipments were staggered to prevent suspicion, and each member had a clearly defined role. No one person had full knowledge of the operation, ensuring that if someone were caught, the entire network wouldn't collapse immediately. The operation was designed to be invisible, moving silently through towns and cities, unnoticed by law enforcement and ordinary citizens alike. It was the perfect crime, at least in the eyes of the gang. They moved with confidence, certain that no one would ever discover the millions hidden inside blocks of cheese. But even the most careful plans can have weak points. And in the world of crime, overconfidence can become a fatal flaw. As the gang continued their operations, the stage was being set for a discovery that would shock the nation and expose the hidden underworld of drug trafficking in the most unexpected way. The gang's operation thrived because it was hidden in plain sight. At first glance, everything seemed completely normal. Cheese trucks rolled down narrow streets, making deliveries to small shops and markets, and no one gave them a second thought. To the locals, it was just another supplier bringing fresh products for their shelves. The smell of cheese, the clatter of crates being unloaded, and the friendly greetings of the delivery drivers created the perfect cover for a multi-million-pound drug operation. The brilliance of the gang's plan lay in its simplicity. Inside each cheese block, carefully hollowed out and sealed, lay bundles of cocaine worth thousands of pounds. The gang had perfected a method that left the cheese looking untouched. Not a single smudge, tear, or irregularity betrayed the illicit contents hidden within. To the untrained eye, it was all just food, nothing more. Even during inspections, the drugs were nearly impossible to detect. Every shipment that left their warehouses seemed completely ordinary, leaving law enforcement with no reason to investigate. The gang's members were experts at blending into everyday life. They dressed like business people, attended public events, and mingled with townsfolk as if they were ordinary entrepreneurs. Their charm and calculated appearances made them appear trustworthy and respectable. People admired them for running a successful business, never suspecting that behind the professional facade, they were orchestrating one of the most audacious criminal operations in recent British history. Their network was surprisingly organized. Suppliers in far-off locations sent raw cocaine through secret channels. Transporters managed the logistics, making sure shipments were staggered and carefully timed. Local distributors handled the final stage, moving the cheese to shops and markets. Each person had a small role, a piece of the puzzle, and the gang ensured no one had full knowledge of the operation. This compartmentalization prevented leaks and made it harder for authorities to piece together the entire network. Even the towns themselves were carefully chosen. The gang avoided big cities where police surveillance was heavy and attention was high. Instead, they operated in quiet towns and suburban neighborhoods, places where deliveries were routine and no one questioned a truck pulling into a shop late at night. By staying under the radar, they managed to maintain a flawless image while moving millions of pounds worth of cocaine across the country. It wasn't just the shipments that were clever, it was also the psychological aspect of the operation. People simply could not imagine that something as harmless and ordinary as cheese could conceal a criminal empire. That disbelief worked in the gang's favor, allowing them to operate boldly while remaining invisible to those around them. They had turned everyday life into a cloak of invisibility, moving their contraband through familiar streets as though it belonged there, all while escaping the notice of law enforcement. For months the gang continued without interference. The cheese trucks delivered on time, the packages went undisturbed, and the operation seemed untouchable. But as careful as they were, even the smallest slip could unravel everything, and in the world of crime, perfection rarely lasts forever. One tiny oversight, unnoticed by the gang, would soon trigger a chain of events that law enforcement could never have anticipated, bringing their secret empire crashing down. The gang's operation relied on more than just clever concealment. It thrived because of the meticulous planning behind every step. Every movement, every delivery, and every interaction had been calculated to minimize risk and avoid detection. The gang had designed an intricate system, where each member played a small, controlled role. Drivers moved the shipments along carefully planned routes. Warehouse workers managed inventory with precision, and distributors ensured that every block of cocaine-laced cheese reached its destination without raising suspicion. No single person had full knowledge of the operation, and that secrecy made it nearly impossible for outsiders to uncover the scale of the network. The transportation methods were as innovative as they were simple. Trucks carrying blocks of cheese would avoid major highways and city centers, instead traveling through quiet towns and rural roads where police presence was limited. The deliveries were scheduled at different times to avoid patterns that might draw attention. Even the trucks themselves were ordinary, unremarkable vehicles that blended perfectly into everyday traffic. Law enforcement had no reason to suspect that behind the wheels of these common delivery vehicles lay one of the largest cocaine smuggling operations in the country. Warehouses and storage sites were carefully selected for their inconspicuous appearances. They looked like ordinary storage facilities or small food distribution centers. Inside, however, a hidden world existed where cocaine was meticulously packaged and inserted into cheese blocks. Workers handled the products with care, ensuring that the cheese looked untouched and natural. The gang's attention to detail was astonishing. Even under scrutiny, a casual observer would have seen nothing amiss. Everything about the operation was designed to maintain the illusion of innocence. The gang members themselves were masters at maintaining appearances. They attended social events, invested in local businesses, and cultivated relationships with people in positions of trust. Their outward charm and professionalism gave them an aura of legitimacy that kept suspicion at bay. People admired them as entrepreneurs or community figures, never imagining that behind the smiles and suits, they were orchestrating an empire worth millions of pounds. Even law enforcement officers found it difficult to imagine that such a high-level operation could exist in plain sight. Communication within the gang was just as strategic. Messages were encrypted, meetings were discreet, and instructions were given in ways that minimized risk. Each member understood their responsibilities and knew only what they needed to know. This compartmentalization was critical. If a single individual was caught or investigated, the rest of the operation could continue without compromise. It was a methodical system built to withstand mistakes, making the gang appear untouchable. For months, their system functioned flawlessly. Shipments arrived on time, no inspections revealed the hidden contraband, and the gang accumulated wealth at an astonishing pace. But the very sophistication of the operation created pressure. Every member had to perform perfectly, and one minor error, no matter how small, could trigger a chain reaction capable of exposing the entire network. In the world of crime, even the best-laid plans can collapse under the weight of a single oversight, and the gang was about to learn that lesson in the most dramatic way possible. For months, the gang operated with near-perfect precision, and law enforcement had no idea where to start. The shipments moved like clockwork, the trucks followed their planned routes, and every cheese delivery looked entirely legitimate. But even the most flawless operation can be undone by the smallest mistake, and for the cheese cocaine gang, that mistake came in the form of a surveillance camera in an unassuming town. It was not a high-tech, state-of-the-art camera watching for criminal activity. It was an ordinary security camera, installed outside a small corner shop to monitor daily deliveries and deter petty theft. The camera recorded hundreds of mundane events every week, deliveries of bread, milk, and the occasional cheese block. Nobody ever imagined it would play a critical role in exposing a multi-million-pound drug operation. But one night, the camera captured something unusual. A delivery truck pulled into the narrow street later than usual. The driver, a man who usually exuded confidence and calm, appeared nervous. He parked awkwardly and lingered longer than normal, glancing around as though someone might be watching. Then, in a moment of carelessness, he left a small, unmarked package outside the shop before hurrying to complete the delivery. To the average passerby, it looked like a minor error, something anyone could do while handling multiple deliveries. But that small package, unnoticed by the driver, would be the thread that eventually unraveled the gang's carefully woven empire. Curious locals noticed the package and reported it to the police. What might have seemed trivial at first quickly became the first clue that something larger was afoot. Investigators, initially skeptical, decided to take a closer look. They retrieved the package and examined it. Inside was not ordinary cheese but hollowed-out blocks, containing a significant quantity of cocaine. The discovery shocked them. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a method of smuggling so clever and audacious that it had escaped detection for months. From that single moment, a chain reaction began. The authorities traced the truck back to its warehouse, monitored the delivery routes, and identified the members of the gang involved in this shipment. Surveillance intensified, and the investigation rapidly expanded from a small-town curiosity into a full-scale operation spanning multiple locations. Each piece of evidence led to another, revealing the scale and sophistication of the network the gang had built. The surveillance slip exposed the gang's vulnerability, overconfidence. They had believed their meticulous planning and the innocuous nature of cheese deliveries would keep them invisible. They had underestimated the possibility that a single minor oversight, leaving a package unattended for even a few moments, could trigger the collapse of their entire operation. That one unremarkable camera, quietly recording its usual footage, had captured the mistake that no one else saw, setting the stage for one of the most extraordinary takedowns in UK criminal history. Suddenly, the empire the gang thought was untouchable was no longer secure. What had seemed like a perfect crime was now unraveling piece by piece. From a quiet street in a sleepy town, law enforcement began to pull the threads that would expose an operation worth millions of pounds, proving that even the smallest error can have catastrophic consequences when a criminal empire relies too heavily on precision and secrecy. Armed with the evidence from the surveillance footage and the seized package, law enforcement began planning a full-scale raid. Every detail was carefully coordinated to catch the gang off guard and secure the warehouses, shops, and transport vehicles involved in the operation. Officers studied delivery schedules, mapped the gang's routes, and identified key locations where the cocaine-laced cheese was stored. What had once seemed like an untouchable criminal empire was now vulnerable, and investigators were determined to bring it down. The first raid took place before dawn, when the streets were still quiet and the gang members least expected anyone to interfere. Teams of officers moved in simultaneously on multiple locations, from suburban warehouses to small-town shops that appeared innocent on the outside. The precision of the operation reflected months of preparation. Every officer knew their role, and the element of surprise was critical. For the gang, who had operated for so long with confidence, the sudden presence of law enforcement was shocking and disorienting. As the raids unfolded, investigators discovered the hidden world that had existed just beneath the surface. Ordinary-looking warehouses revealed hidden compartments, filled with blocks of cheese, each carefully hollowed out and packed with cocaine. The sheer volume was staggering, hundreds of kilos worth millions of pounds. In small shops and market stalls, similar discoveries were made. The gang had created a complex, decentralized network that allowed them to distribute drugs widely while maintaining an innocent facade. The scale of the operation was beyond what most had imagined. Every discovery seemed more shocking than the last. Officers found packaging equipment, false invoices, and encrypted communication devices used to coordinate the operation. Even the trucks, which had looked like ordinary delivery vehicles, contained sophisticated hidden compartments specifically designed for smuggling. The gang had invested time, money, and ingenuity to make sure nothing would ever be traced back to them. Yet, despite all their precautions, one minor oversight, the unattended package caught on camera, had set the entire investigation in motion. The arrests themselves were dramatic. Gang members, some dressed in suits and pretending to conduct normal business, were caught completely off guard. Confusion and panic spread as they realized the authorities had penetrated every layer of their network. Some tried to hide or destroy evidence, but the raids were thorough. Officers confiscated trucks, warehouse equipment, and the remaining drug shipments, ensuring that the operation was brought to a complete halt. For law enforcement, it was a moment of triumph. The raid had exposed the true scale of one of the most audacious smuggling operations in UK history. The gang, once confident and untouchable, was now facing charges that would carry severe penalties. The cocaine-laced cheese, which had seemed like the perfect disguise, had become the gang's undoing. What had started as a single mistake, a small package left outside a shop, had now escalated into a dramatic takedown that would make headlines across the country. The operation demonstrated the importance of attention to detail, both for criminals and for law enforcement. While the gang had relied on clever planning and deception, it was the persistence, observation, and quick action of the authorities that ultimately brought them down. In the quiet towns where deliveries had once gone unnoticed, the legacy of the raids would be remembered for years. A reminder that even the most sophisticated criminal schemes can collapse in an instant. With the gang in custody and their warehouses cleared, law enforcement faced the next challenge: unraveling the full scope of the operation. What had appeared at first to be a localized smuggling scheme was quickly revealed to be part of a much larger network, stretching far beyond the quiet towns where the raids had taken place. The investigation expanded rapidly, uncovering a web of international suppliers, middlemen, and distributors that connected the UK to markets in South America and Europe. The sheer scale of the network left even seasoned detectives astonished. Investigators discovered that the gang had not acted alone. The cocaine hidden inside cheese blocks came from sophisticated suppliers overseas, who used covert shipping methods to move the drugs into Europe. These suppliers had decades of experience in drug trafficking, and their precision and efficiency made it easy for the gang to maintain a steady supply. Once the shipments arrived, trusted intermediaries in Spain and other European countries ensured the drugs were transported safely to the UK. Each link in the chain was carefully chosen for reliability, minimizing risk while maximizing profit. Inside the UK, local distributors played a crucial role in the operation. They were responsible for moving the cheese from warehouses to shops, markets, and underground buyers. Many were young or inexperienced, unaware of the international scale of the operation, yet they carried out their duties with precision. Their involvement allowed the gang to remain insulated from direct contact with law enforcement, and it made tracing the drugs back to the leaders of the network extremely difficult. The investigation revealed that the gang had successfully built a decentralized system, where even a single disruption could be managed without collapsing the entire operation. As detectives pieced together the evidence, the network's sophistication became even more apparent. Financial records showed massive sums of money moving through the system, often disguised as legitimate business transactions. Communication logs revealed encrypted messages, coordinating deliveries, shipments, and payments. It was clear that the gang had invested significant resources in creating a professional operation that appeared entirely legitimate. Yet, despite all their planning, the system had one weak point: a reliance on human error. The unattended package captured on camera had been enough to expose the entire network. Each new discovery added another layer to the investigation. Arrests in the UK led to cooperation with international authorities, who traced the supply chain back to its origins. Investigators identified key figures in South America and Europe, piecing together a network that moved millions of pounds worth of cocaine in a seemingly invisible operation. The gang's empire, which had once seemed untouchable, was slowly being dismantled piece by piece. By the time the investigation concluded, the full scale of the gang's operation was clear. What had begun as a clever scheme using cheese to hide drugs had evolved into a complex, international criminal enterprise. Authorities marveled at both the audacity of the plan and the efficiency of the criminals involved. But they also understood that the entire operation had been vulnerable from the start. The tiniest mistake had been enough to set off a chain reaction, ultimately leading to the downfall of a network that had seemed beyond the reach of the law. The downfall of the cheese cocaine gang came down to a mistake that, in hindsight, seemed almost laughably silly. After months of careful planning, international coordination, and meticulous attention to detail, it wasn't a high-tech investigation or a daring undercover operation that ended the gang's empire. It was overconfidence. One member, eager to impress a new buyer and maintain the illusion of efficiency, failed to follow the strict protocols the gang had established. That single error became the crack in the foundation of an otherwise flawless operation. The mistake was subtle but critical. A shipment that should have been carefully labeled, timed, and routed was mishandled. A block of cocaine-laced cheese, meant to blend seamlessly with legitimate deliveries, was mislabeled and left vulnerable. It was the same type of small oversight that could have gone unnoticed 100 times before, yet on this occasion it was enough to trigger a sequence of discoveries that investigators could not ignore. The package drew attention, was reported, and ultimately led the authorities straight to the heart of the gang's operation. This single error exposed the gang's vulnerability, their reliance on perfect execution. The entire operation had depended on every member performing their role exactly as planned. One tiny lapse, one block of cheese left out of place, one route slightly altered, was enough to unravel the network. What had seemed like a clever, airtight system now revealed itself to be surprisingly fragile. The sophistication of the operation, which had initially made it nearly impossible to detect, became irrelevant in the face of a moment of human error. As investigators followed the trail, they realized how the gang's overconfidence had contributed to their own undoing. The members had become so accustomed to success that they believed nothing could touch them. They assumed law enforcement would never suspect cheese as a vehicle for smuggling millions of pounds of cocaine. They assumed the meticulous planning and the innocent appearance of their business would make them untouchable. That arrogance blinded them to the fact that, in criminal enterprises, the smallest slip can have catastrophic consequences. The mislabeled shipment became the key that unlocked the entire network. Police traced it back through delivery routes, warehouses, and distribution points, connecting dots that had previously seemed isolated. Each link revealed another layer of the operation: hidden compartments in trucks, encrypted communication methods, and international connections that extended the gang's reach across continents. What had started as a small, careless error now exposed a multi-million-pound criminal empire in a way that no other investigative effort had managed. It was a humbling moment for the gang. Months of careful planning, ingenuity, and risk management were undone by one simple mistake. The lesson was clear. No matter how clever or sophisticated a criminal operation may appear, overconfidence and complacency can turn strength into vulnerability. In the end, it was a tiny human error that brought down a network that had seemed untouchable, proving that even the most brilliant criminals are ultimately at the mercy of their own misjudgments. By the time the authorities completed their investigation, the story of the cheese cocaine gang became a cautionary tale. It wasn't just about the money, the drugs, or the complex methods. They had been undone by a single moment of carelessness, a reminder that in crime, perfection is an illusion, and even the smallest misstep can be fatal. By the time the investigation reached its conclusion, the full scope of the cheese cocaine gang's operation had been laid bare. What had begun as a clever plan to smuggle cocaine inside blocks of cheese had evolved into a sprawling criminal empire, stretching across the UK and connecting to suppliers and distributors in Europe and South America. The audacity of the scheme had captivated investigators and the public alike, but now, after months of surveillance, raids, and painstaking detective work, justice was finally within reach. The arrests of the gang members sent shockwaves through the towns where they had operated. Ordinary people who had once seen the drivers and shop owners as friendly, trustworthy business people were forced to confront the reality that an international drug smuggling operation had been hidden in their midst. Police had confiscated hundreds of kilos of cocaine, destroyed warehouses, and secured trucks filled with what once seemed like ordinary cheese. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no doubt that the gang's operation had been both massive and highly organized. Court proceedings were swift and decisive. Each member of the gang faced charges ranging from drug trafficking to money laundering and conspiracy. The leaders, who had orchestrated the entire scheme, received the longest sentences, reflecting the severity of their crimes and the extent of the harm caused. Even those who had played smaller roles were held accountable, proving that no participant in the network could escape the consequences. For law enforcement, it was a rare victory, demonstrating that meticulous investigation and persistence could overcome even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. The gang's downfall became a widely discussed cautionary tale. Experts in criminal justice and law enforcement analyzed the case, pointing out that the operation had been undone not by luck or extraordinary investigative methods, but by human error. The single moment of carelessness that triggered the discovery, one mislabeled shipment left unattended, had been enough to dismantle an empire worth millions of pounds. It was a reminder that no matter how elaborate a criminal scheme may be, it is always vulnerable to the smallest mistake. Beyond the courtroom, the impact of the gang's capture was felt in the communities they had infiltrated. Local businesses and markets that had unknowingly participated in the distribution network were reassured that the streets were safer, and law enforcement increased efforts to monitor similar operations more closely. The story of the cheese cocaine gang became both a headline and a lesson, illustrating the lengths to which criminals will go to disguise illegal activity and the importance of vigilance in uncovering it. In the end, the cheese cocaine gang's empire was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Their sophisticated methods, international connections, and boldness had all been undone by one tiny avoidable mistake. What had seemed untouchable was brought crashing down by persistence, observation, and the relentless work of law enforcement. The case remains a striking example of how even the most ingenious criminal operations can be destroyed when arrogance meets human error. And it stands as a lasting reminder that in the world of crime, no one is truly above the law.